Okay.
Thank you for that very interesting talk. I really enjoyed that. And my question was, I saw a little bit of an overlap between integrative dualism and Whitehead's metaphysics. I was wondering if you could comment on that, like specifically how he integrates the mental and the physical into every process in a dualistic.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Whitehead, excuse me, hold on. Process philosophy. Eminent thinker, and he should be more widely read today than he is. But two things. One is process thought does have more in common with what they call panpsychism, a view that is reviving today. So David Chalmers, Thomas Nagel are very attracted to it. Linda Lednow, various figures. So there is some resonance there. I think, the integrative dualism that I'm maintaining is more in keeping with recognizing the individual experiencer. And so as a subject. So just to pull the word process out, it seems to me that processes can't think, can't act, can't do, can't. States of, pardon me, excuse me, states of consciousness are not themselves states of consciousness. Well, let me put it differently. A state of consciousness is not conscious of itself. It's rather a subject, and I'll use the word substance here. A substance, you need, as Frege said, you need an experiencer to experience. And it kind of fits in. It might be too much common sense appeal to ordinary examples rather than superpositions and the cat and all these extraordinary cases. But as one philosopher mentioned, your feet don't walk, you walk, and you walk with your feet. If your feet walked, they'd need feet. And so I am inclined to emphasize the substantial concrete individual. I believe in abstract objects, and I can't resist mentioning, back to the former speaker, is how some people can deal with great facility with objects, processes, but have no concrete view about what they're actually referring to. So many mathematicians, I think, are actually implicit Platonism. They think that numbers actually are, but they are often non-committal. I don't know what numbers are, but they do mathematics. But in this case, I think we know ourselves as subjects, and we need to avoid the caricature of substance that we find in, say, Locke. It's a je ne sais quoi. I do not know what a substance is. Whereas really, we know first and foremost, better than anything else around us, we know of the reality of ourselves as substantial, concrete individuals.
Right.
So that's where, but process does get us an integral picture of the mental and physical. It's commendable in that sense. I guess the question is, what do we get from it? So Whitehead famously said that our beliefs and commitments come with price tags. What do we believe? Now, I submit to you and I believe that we're talking with each other, that we're interacting, and I think that comes with a price tag. I think it involves, to use the term earlier, an irreducible kind of recourse to things like reasons, desires, questions, understanding, and all that. Now, one of the things that process gives us is, they think, a clearer case of emergence of the self. That is, the self turns out to be an experiencer, but inside and constituting us are other experiencers. However, I think I have a very difficult time making sense of the idea that I'm anything less than the person thinking these thoughts. I'm an ens per se, a thing per itself, as opposed to an ens per alia, a thing doing something for something else. So somebody might say the corporation of Apple company is very happy today. Now, there is no actual concrete subject, Apple company, feeling happiness. That's an ens per alia. It's an abstract object made up of CEOs, CFOs, engineers, technicians, applied scientists. So I don't think process gives us, it's not exactly a Trojan horse, like don't let it in because it's going to cause all kinds of problems. But I think it's promising. It does fill out integrative dualism, but there are some reasons to resist some of its conclusions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor آزادگان. استاد آزادگان در خدمت شما هستیم.
Hello, and thank you very much. My question concerns Tom Nagel's idea in Mind and Cosmos, in which he asserts that the nature in a process of evolution comes to produce consciousness in a teleologically manner. And so he can, to some extent, arrange the conflict between consciousness and naturalism. I want to know what's your idea about Nagel's idea in Mind and Cosmos.
Yeah. And if there's time, and if the questions dribble out, I would love to share my last experience in Iran, which was very moving to me. And so we can keep that in mind. But I think we have 28 minutes. So I think Mind and Consciousness is a brave, brave book. And I find it extremely forceful. Now, it's brave. I'm reminded of when some people use the word brave. For example, if you're at a restaurant and you ask for dessert and somebody puts an apple down and you say, well, that was very brave. That often means it's uncooked and you're taking a lot of risk here. Well, I would say where Nagel, who was briefly one of my teachers, I attended a seminar of his for a year and found him absolutely a role model of philosophy. He would come in each week with fresh paper. He would write a fresh presentation for a half hour each session, and then with his fellow professors as well as students, we would argue through with him. Now, I find his case against what he calls the Darwinian naturalist hypothesis very forceful, especially shooting down some Dawkins' rather cheap shots at theism. Dawkins seems to think that if God exists, you have to explain God, and God is very complex, like a highly complex compared to very simple protozoa, biological mechanisms. Where's the explanation for this? And he points out that the very concept of God is an ens necessarium. It says a necessarily existing being. So the conversation about philosophy of religion doesn't need to begin with God or the holy. You could begin with, is there reason to believe that the causal account, explanation, and understanding of the cosmos, is it sufficient if we just understand it in terms of contingent realities? And there are some of us, including me, who think that that would be unreasonable, that we need to understand the source of contingency in something that's necessarily existing, but doesn't turn the contingencies into necessity. So I think his criticism of theism is a little weak. It occurs in the first two chapters. I've responded, but where it is forceful is identifying reason, values, normativity as really foundational. In many ways, he's like, I believe he's still alive, but Parfit, who died sometime recently, he believed naturalism is actually false. He was an atheist, largely due to the problem of evil, but he was an atheist. But he believed teleology is foundational. And then he started entertaining questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? And we might rephrase it, why are there contingent realities versus nothing, no contingent realities? But in any case, people worried about Parfit and people worried about Nagel. Like, is he going to go theistic on us? Well, he's already indicated that he has a visceral distaste for theism. He is not going there. And it's not just because he likes to be right and he's an atheist. He's averse to the thesis. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I won't speculate about that. However, if I bracket theism, it strikes me that something like, to go back to the earlier speaker, Whitehead, or to a kind of revival of Aristotelianism, something like that would seem to me to gain credibility. That is, if there are overwhelming problems with theism, then locating teleology is not going to explain why there's teleology. So it's still going to come up with snake eyes on the big question. The cosmos is going to turn out to be a brute fact, but it's gains in reasonability. And it reminds me of my mentor, to quote him one more time, Chisholm. He was once asked, he had a view of, self-awareness. And he was asked, what's the evidence for your view? And he replied, the other views. In other words, the other views were so problematic that his view seemed to him, anyway, the more promising. And so similarly, if we bracket theism or these more transcendental understandings of causation, transcosmic, then I think his view looks pretty promising to me.
Okay. Thank you, Professor آزادگان. تشکر وی استاد آزادگان که در خدمتشون هستیم و ایشالا در روزهای آینده هم در خدمتشون هستیم. حالا هم ارائه دارم، هم که اون دبیر علمی کشیدم. آقای رؤوفی، شما هم سوال تو تکست باکس نوشتید، هم سوال بلند کردیم. میخواین میکروفون رو بدم که چون دست بلند کردیم دیگه خودتون بپرسین. میکروفون وصله با آقای رؤوفی.
Hi, can you read me?
I
Professor,
can hear you.
Do you read me?
Yes, I
All
can.
right.
I can
Can I
hear
ask
you.
my question? All right. Professor, I'm the guy from the previous session that I asked the question of entropy. And here's the question. When I was a child, I always used to play with Lego cities. And at the end, when it was done, there was always something missing, and that thing was a living being in that house, which the house built for. So the same is with AI and all the human effort to make AI conscious. Do you think that it is the same with God? And the reason that God has made us conscious, part of Himself, is the same reason that we want to make AI conscious. And is it because we are conscious? Will the AI that we build, if, for example, we make it conscious, try to build a consciousness itself?
Well, I can respond if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think his connection is kind of weak. If you understand the question, we would thank you to if you answer it.
Yeah. Well, I am technically in what's called a tradition of Christian Platonism. So we do not accept everything that the historical Plato held, but we look to the Platonic stress on the good, the true, and the beautiful as foundational in our understanding of God. So in our understanding of God, God's decrees, divinely revealed precepts, God's ways, God's very nature is essentially goodness. Plato, and in the Platonic tradition, we believe that goodness is communicable. That is, that you can share goodness. You can't share yourself, literally, in the sense that you can make another self. You can share yourself with your spouse, with your deepest friends, with your students, with your vocation, but you can share wisdom and love, but you can't share the being that you have. Now, Muslims and Christians diverge slightly on this. About most of us believe that creation was free, that is, God was not necessitated to create, let alone to create conscious subjects. But we believe that it is the nature of goodness to be self-diffusive. And so we believe that, to use a term that Leibniz did, that the divine has an inclination, not determined, but an inclination to freely create. And in this tradition, we also believe, in many of us, in a kind of principle of plenitude. To use the Latin, bonum est multiplex, that is, there is a good in diversity. So there was a good in there being other planets, maybe indefinitely boundaryless space, living creatures of all sorts of varieties. But principally, consciousness is essential for there to be a relationship. And the personal side of this might be more evidenced in, say, Sufi parts, mystical parts of Islam than others, Shia or Sunni. But really, I think that so much in the Quran invites us into the kingdom of God, which Christians also believe in. This is like, for those who are secular philosophers, you might think of Kant's kingdom of ends. But a kingdom requires actually intermingling, co-inherence, that is, a cohering in terms of love and of care for each other, the whole of creation and the like. So unlike Legos, which are inanimate objects, where they go where they're placed, many of us, and again, some Muslims believe in a very strong view of providence, that the will of Allah is omnideterminative. And some Christians have too, very, very strong view. I happen to be a strong proponent of free will, which is technically called libertarianism. That is, it strikes me that if I'm choosing to be in a conference versus not choosing, and it's a genuine choice, I can make it the case that the reasons I choose to present to you, those are the reasons that they become determining forces, but I wasn't determined for them to be determining forces. So I think that while many of us who are Muslims and Christians can recognize the good of inanimate objects, the good of simply being, but most of us hold a special place for conscious awareness. Now, we also adopt different views on how much we can be aware of the divine nature. For example, can we speak univocally of God's power, knowledge, and justice? Must all of this be wrapped in mystery, or should they all be analogous? God is like a loving father. Is he literally a loving father? No, but we use lots of analogies in our religions. Yeah, but it is. There was an article in Psychology Today, a popular psychology magazine, and it was listing all the levels of awareness. And it started with sensations, and it got up to consciousness, and then it had a higher level, which was non-consciousness. And I think I wasn't the only reader that thought, well, I'm not sure that would be desirable, in the sense that you wouldn't have any subjects, any selves. At the risk of going on a little bit too long, though, let me say there is a rich, highly respected tradition of Buddhism, which includes the belief that nirvana, the end state, will be bliss. Okay, there will be joy, happiness, but bliss is an English term that's often used. But paradoxically, there will be no subjects there that will feel bliss. It'll just be bliss. Now, because of my commitment to subjects and substance and substantial individuals, I take a different position. While I deeply respect these different conceptual schemes, they produce a way of life of compassion. They have all sorts of goods, but philosophically, I think we have reason to be anchored in subjects and the good of consciousness and the good of freedom.
Charles, thank you for your answer. The questions are done for now. We have time about for your experience in Iran that you were talking about, and because we have time, we would. I mean, because you explain everything so colorful and so beautiful way. I mean, so yeah, yeah. Go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll offer my anecdote, and then I'm going to have to say goodbye, but I will rejoin the conference as a participant. So here's what happened. In 2013, I was invited to a conference in Qum to honor the philosopher and statesman Mohammad Mutahari, who was he was very active in the original Islamic revolution. He was also a philosopher of great prowess. And I presented on him on consciousness, of all things, that he actually believed that materialism was false. And he, not just as a Muslim, but as a philosopher who is a Muslim, really embraced the reality of the mental. And he thought this was foundational. And to deny consciousness was corrosive. That is, it would lead to a denigration of the dignity and the beauty of life, and so on. Well, he was assassinated by, as it turns out, Marxist opposition force that was seeking to hijack the revolution in a Marxist direction. We saw at the conference several movies that reenacted his assassination. And so the anecdote that I will mention was it caused quite a stir at the conference, because I maintain that one of the principal aims of philosophy is non-strategic, non-violent reasoning. That is, from the example of Socrates, we could go with Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, any number of great Muslim philosophers, or as in the case of Muhammad Mutahari al-Shahid. They believe that first and foremost, one should try to persuade people of values and purposes through reason, not through actual force or the threat of force. And what he did with the Marxists is they presented arguments, and he engaged in arguments with them. It was, in Latin, you'd call it epistoliary, the word for epistle or letter writing. He engaged in writing as a response to their writing. So for all I know, he could have exercised through any number of forces, they're being silenced and the like, but he didn't silence them. He sought to reason with them. And I maintained that he died for the Islamic Revolution, but that he also died for philosophy, the love of wisdom. Philosophia, we might say the nuances are different, but in English, or which we inherit from the Greek, philosophy means the love of wisdom, philosophia. And his willingness, as it turns out, unwise, perhaps unprudent, but he stood, and here I'll use the word brave, not in the Apple Tom Nagel sense, but in terms of courage. He sought to engage others in reasoning rather than recourse to real or the threat of violence. And actually, that was the one time that people clapped at this conference. There was no clapping. And so that's my anecdote. And I particularly got along well with my his son. And at the end of the conference, I asked, because this was only my second time in Iran, and I didn't know the customs, but I said, is it customary for men to embrace? And he said, yes. And so we embraced. So that was my one anecdote. So thank you very much for having me and for allowing me to share my story.
That was I didn't expect that, but it was a beautiful, insightful story, and we wish we can have you another time in Iran. We have another question that
Oh, sure.
yeah, the question is a very short question. Is there any proven activity that's I guess that the body and the soul are separate?
I would say this is a let me I'll just answer. There's not time to really reflect on this. I would say this is a philosophical thesis rather than something that can be determined empirically. There were neuroscientific experiments by Lipid 10 years ago about how it seemed that the brain, as it were, made the body just react away prior to a microsecond before the conscious mind did. These experiments have been highly, highly questioned. And one interesting response has been that free will might consist of not saying yes to something, but saying no to the disposition to say, raise your right hand, and you say no. So there have been attempts to explain the conscious in terms of the mental, but the conscious in terms of the body. But I think that really this comes down to phenomenology, what appears to us to be the case. And if it appears to you, you're deciding whether to take a bribe tonight or not. You're deciding to give a paper or not. And it seems as though it's an open future. And also you seem to be sensing, feeling, acting, thinking coherently. Those are good, we say in Latin, prima facie reasons. That means first glance, first face. And I would say secundum facie. That's when you second glance, when you think of something twice, is 6 the lowest possible number. You go through it once and you think, better check that. Secundum facie. So it has probative force. And I think sufficient to actually, first of all, you have to act as though it's integrative dualism is true. I say you're stuck there. But I would say there is overwhelming reason to believe it's probably true. Now, our former speaker is working on a book on probability, so I shouldn't speak to this, but some philosophers are real sticklers about probability. So here's one case. You read the news and it says there's 90% chance it'll rain in Tehran tomorrow. And some philosophers think it would be wrong for you to believe it will rain tomorrow. They think you should just believe it's likely that it'll rain tomorrow. And perhaps there's some room for that. However, I'm of the mind that if it's 90% sure, if it really seems as though you're an agent and sensorially embodied and so on, it's not so much 90% or 70%. It's reasonable to believe until it's defeated. And a defeater is an additional reason where you have to undermine the evidentiary force that you have. And in my mind, the evidentiary force is there are claims to have it. We make mistakes in all sorts of areas of life, but they're not sufficient to overcome it. But as our first speaker said, maybe 1,000 years from now, it'll be different. Anyway, thank you for that last question.
We have another question. Okay, yeah. You pretty, to some extent, he answered it, but I'll just, because we want to have equality and everybody questions be answered. This will be the last question. Do you think that if we didn't have consciousness, we'd be like patience in the Awakenings movie, or will be as we are? This is a question that Amir has asked.
Good question. Yeah, the patients in the Awakening movie and the book Awakening, some of them seemed to be absolutely dormant, and so asleep. And believe it or not, there are live philosophical questions about the nature of sleep. Behaviorists in the mid-20th century actually denied the existence of dreams. Gilbert Ryle thought, Norman Malcolm thought, dreams are lies we tell each other over breakfast. That's what Norman Malcolm said. He said, because you have no behavior, you just have a body like this. And it would be kind of like the book Consciousness by Galen Strawson in the 90s. And he imagined wind watchers that these heaps of, they're biological and they're conscious, but they don't have any action of any kind. So I would say in the awakening, hard to say. I guess my own hunch, having read the book and seen the movie, is that there was the level of consciousness you have in a deep sleep. So as Oliver Sacks describes these patients coming to, and he describes it as an awakening, and they come to reality. That's another term he uses. I would say there had to be some you there. When Naomi becomes conscious, there had to have been a Naomi to become conscious. So I'm inclined to think in awakening, there was some residual, some element, but nothing like selfhood that Oliver Sacks was able to bring some of his patients permanently to, but many of them only temporarily to. Thank you for that great question. And I wish everybody salam, peace.